Welcome to Rico 12. I'm Justin B., your host and a child of an all-powerful and perfectly loving God and an addict living in the miracle of recovery one day at a time. I'm so grateful to be the host of Rico 12. It's such a blessing, and it's just amazes me. Rico 12 is an open to all addictions and afflictions and any manifestation of the disease of alcoholism. We're an organization open to all of those. We share tools, offering hope from those walking a similar path. We gather from diverse backgrounds, faiths, and locations to learn and support one another. Our speakers come from various fellowships and experiences, demonstrating the universal principles of recovery. And Rico 12 is not allied or affiliated with any specific 12-step fellowship. We are open to all. This is Rico 12 speaker meeting number 345. Thank you for joining us live or in the recording later. Today's speaker is Shay M. He is a first-time guest speaker on Rico 12, and I'm really grateful to hear from him today. He'll be speaking today on the topic entitled, How the 12 Steps Saved Me from a Life of Lust, Fantasy, and Violence. And I look forward to hearing more about this message that intrigued me, and I'm really grateful to hear about it. So, first, for a few quick announcements. Rico 12 does offer a variety of recovery resources, including other podcasts, the Big Book Roundtable, and Noodle It Out with Nikki. And we also have social media communities. To explore more, you can visit us at reco12.com. That's reco12.com. And check out the chat and the show notes for links. I'll be putting those in as this meeting goes along and also in the show notes of the podcast. Rico 12 is self-supporting, and your contributions help us continue this mission. Thank you to all our spearhead donors, past and present, especially this week to Logan and Jacqueline. Your support truly makes a difference. If you'd like to contribute, please visit reco12.com/support or check the links that I'll put in the show notes or the chat for one-time or monthly donation options. Every bit of support, whether it be financial or word of mouth, really helps us share these messages of recovery with others throughout the world. I mean, if you just look around this, we are represented in several countries already, and I'm just so grateful to have have you all here. Each week, we receive light and inspiration from our speakers. Their experience brings hope, meaning, worth, and growth to us as listeners. Now, let's welcome today's guest speaker, Shay M. I have a little bit about him, so relax while I read this, and then we'll get him on the floor. Shay was in the various S fellowships for 2 years, but was unable to stay sober from sex addiction. It wasn't until he discovered a Big Book step study that his road to sobriety and a spiritual experience happened. Shay is a member of All Addicts Anonymous and Violence Anonymous. Take it away, Shay. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Justin. Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your mornings, afternoons, evenings to be here. It's a real privilege to be here. I just want to start with some gratitude. Gratitude to God for healing me and helping me recover from this very cunning and baffling illness that has claimed so many lives. And grateful for the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, founding fathers. And also thank you, Justin, for all the work you do. I've listened religiously to your podcasts when I was not really in a position to share and I was doing my work. I must have listened to hundreds of your podcasts, with Miss Nikki and David G. So thank you, brother, for everything that you do. It doesn't go unnoticed. A bit about me. I want to talk about the solution. I want to talk about the 12 steps and how it saved me from a very tricky tight spot. But I'll start with step one. The problem. The problem for me. I could say maybe I didn't have the best upbringing. Maybe my family was a bit reserved. We weren't able to connect well to our emotions, and perhaps I was a bit isolated as a child. But overall, I would say I had a great upbringing. I came from quite a wealthy family. I went to one of the best schools in the country, and I excelled really well in academics. Never had any issues with going hungry. So, I just had an alcoholic mind. I always had an alcoholic mind. And I remember when I was just a kid, I had certain obsessive compulsive disorders, already. Like I needed to have my toys placed in a certain way. And if someone disrupted that, I would have a fit. Um, and that then shifted to clothes, shifted to hairstyles. And this is before puberty. I remember that I wanted to control my external environment. I just had an alcoholic mind, and I haven't got any more wise on why, and that's okay for me, because as far as I'm concerned, this is it's a twofold illness. I have an obsession of the mind, and I have a physical allergy. So, my alcoholic mind decided to go towards fantasy. Um, as a kid, I loved computer games. I loved video games, RPGs. I played them all. And, that was my first taste of escaping reality. And I got a PC when I was 11 years old. It was still a dial-up connection at that point. But my whole adolescent life grew up around the PC and around messaging services and file sharing services. So I had an unhealthy obsession with that, and other people could have an unhealthy obsession with food, or um, real people. But for me, it was not. I wasn't interested in real people. I was interested in fantasy, and that was my drug of choice. And so fast forward to puberty, it's a no-brainer. I'm going to become addicted to pornography, and I'm going to become addicted to masturbation, because these are things that involve tons of fantasy. And you know, behind that is a fear of people, a fear of connection. So, you know, this is a progressive disease, and it's no surprise where I ended up when I started working, and I had income. I lost my virginity to someone that I paid for sex. You know, it was on the cards from a really early age that this was going to happen to me. So, my story is that I used lust as a way to relieve stress, as a reward and incentive system. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it talks about um, Bill's story. Bill's story is one where he made a life that allowed him to drink morning, noon, and night, and I made a life that allowed me to lust morning, noon, and night. I was working in the city as an economist. We would do a lot of drinking, a lot of drugs, and we would get a lot of bonuses at the end of the month, and that would go into all of these addictions. And I choose this way of living because I was a lust addict. It was perfect. During the night, I had these wild fantasies of being a professional musician. And again, that was all about what can I get? How can I vicariously live this fantasy that I believe is worth obtaining? The rock and roll lifestyle, or maybe harking back to some of those video games I played as a kid, like how can I create this life? I wanted to live every life except my own. Okay. So it's a progressive disease. And I ended up spending something like £30,000 on paying for professional services, and £15,000 on drugs. So this started off as, oh, I'm only going to do this once, what stays in New York stays in New York, or this is just a lad's holiday. When I get back to the UK, I'm not going to do this anymore. That was what I used to do. Is I used to go abroad and do it once, and then I'd find that the addiction would follow me back, right? So this progressed, over the years, from lust and drugs to violence for me, and I'm not talking about just getting into fights. I'm talking about damage to property. I'm talking about theft. I'm talking about intimidation. Gaslighting, abusive relationships. Okay, this did not just stop with lust, and to finish my step one experience, I thought it was just a matter of finding someone that I was always looking for a partner that I could, that would fix me, and guess what? One came along and I thought, okay, I'll fall in love. That's the answer. That relationship, was, a complete train wreck. I was totally absorbed with what can I get from this person. And I was not interested in what they wanted, and we used to play all sorts of games trying to make the relationship work. Shall we have an open relationship? Shall we look at polyamory? Shall we just decide we're asexual now and not have sex at all? You know, maybe we need to pick the right label to fit the problem. Maybe we're autistic and therefore we need some strategy there. The solution was always mental and physical, and it always involved someone else changing, right? Not me, them. Okay. They're the problem. Okay. So, a good example from the big book that I like at the moment is Jim the car salesman. He goes to a restaurant looking for a customer and ends up ordering some whiskey. And he decides to take the whiskey with some milk. And that's a really nice metaphor for me, because the milk represents the goodness, the milky goodness of life. And the whiskey is the lust. The whiskey is the addiction. And it's hiding in the milk. And you can't see the whiskey because the goodness is covering it up, right? That the milk is completely covering up the fact there's whiskey in there. And Jim, his dishonesty is so great, he fools himself into thinking it's just milk, right? It's just milk. And that's what I was doing, with my relationships. Within the relationship was whiskey, was lust, was self-seeking. And I would just pull the wool over my eyes, right? I was lying to myself the whole time. So when that relationship ended, I had a brief feeling of relief that I was finally single again. But then the fantasy really overtook me, and I ended up volunteering around the country in off-grid situations. This was the geographical cure. If I could stay in forests and farms and on boats, I could have a spiritual experience connecting with nature, and that would help me not repeat these patterns of addiction. I was wrong. So wrong. I ended up living on a boat with some crack addicts, convinced that this boat was somehow the epitome of like sustainable living, but the truth was that it was just infested with rats, and there was no power, there was no food, no light. I was sleeping in the coal room with my lungs full of soot. I caught COVID and I was losing my teeth, and I really thought that I was living this bohemian musician lifestyle. But I was kidding myself, and it was time to face the truth. At that point, I made all of those decisions, and that's what I chose to do, is to live like that, you know. So that was my step one experience. So step two, came to believe in a power greater than self. Okay, so at this point, I realized I could not rely on a spirit of nature. I couldn't rely on nature to heal me, because whenever I went away from nature and I went back to the city, the problem was multiplied. So, so I needed to believe in God, and the capital G, yeah. And it took me 2 years to get to this point, and you know, I just started to accept that, you know, maybe I needed a power that was I needed to think of a power that was bigger and greater than I was able to think of, and that was God. And things just started happening. I started sharing with people in various fellowships that I was looking for a new sponsor. And there was a sister in one of the fellowships I was in for artists. It was called Artists Anonymous. And she put me in touch with someone who did Big Book. And when I met my sponsor, he spoke differently to the other sponsors I had. He spoke like he had had a spiritual experience, that he had recovered, and his story aligned very closely with mine. And so at that point, I was really willing to do anything to recover. And he asked me two questions. He said, but firstly, have you really had enough? If you look deep in your heart, have you actually had enough? And if the answer is yes, are you willing to go to any lengths to recover? And he gave me a day to think about that. And the answer was yes. I'm willing to do anything. This thing is killing me. You know, from here, it's either jail or death. And you know, we went through the work, you know, and one of the first exercises we did was on page 47, the spiritual terms, you know, looking at my prejudices, my old beliefs on every single spiritual term: God, prayer, meditation, church, mosque, you know, every single term I could think of. And then prayerfully arriving at a new concept. And this is when I started to have a change in attitude, you know, because I was, when I was reading the Big Book, I was starting to see that the problem is actually self, and self is made up of ideas, feelings, emotions, conceptions, prejudices, beliefs. And I needed a new set of ideas, beliefs, emotions, and feelings if I was going to recover. And so looking at the spiritual terms and then understanding what the problem is, right? So on page 62 is our third step reading. And it describes the alcoholic as being like an actor who is forever trying to arrange the show, who's forever trying to get people to like him. But what happens? The actor steps on the toes of other people and they retaliate. So no matter how gracious, no matter how nice I try to be, people don't do what I want them to do. Surprise, right? And reading that, it suddenly clicked. I'm always going to be the actor. I just get to choose who's going to direct the show. It's either going to be God or it's going to be self. And that was a big realization. You know, we covered step 3, step 10 and 11 very early on in the process. We didn't do them in order. You know, we were doing step 3, step 10 and 11 within a few weeks. And that was critical to my recovery from lust, because I needed spiritual armor and spiritual weaponry to stay sober long enough to actually receive this message from the big book. And, the 10 step, continuing to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, lust, jealousy, greed, fantasy, just continuing to watch and asking God to remove these things. That was a big thing. That helped me stay sober in the early days long enough to work, the latter steps, right? So another part of step 10 is to correct mistakes as you go along and make amends immediately. I started to practice this right from the beginning. And I had a number of spiritual experiences as a result of this. Just to relate one, I was working as a dog carer, and I crashed a van full of dogs into a parked car. And the old me would have just driven off. But I paused, I did the 3rd step prayer, and I called my sponsor. And we prayed. And he asked me, Shay, you've just hit a car. I don't know what it's like in the UK, but where I'm from, if you do that, you kind of have to stop and maybe give them your insurance details, And so I left a message on the car I hit, with my phone number. And I just wholeheartedly wanted to make amends for any harm I've caused this person. And long story short, the person whose car I hit happened to be one of my boss's customers. And I got to know this guy over a couple of weeks. And he actually offered me a place to sleep when I was being made homeless, right? So this is a guy whose car I hit. And only God could make this up, that this guy ends up becoming a good friend of mine, presumably because I told him the truth, and people value honesty, right? So,
Got questions about addiction, recovery, or just life in general? Let's noodle it out together. Grab your big book, a pen, a highlighter, and a notepad, and join Nikki M and me, Justin B, on Rico 12 Noodle It Out with Nikki M. Each episode, we take real-life questions, ours, yours, and those from the recovery community, and dig deep into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to find real, practical solutions. So, if you're ready to do the work and apply the solution, tune in to Noodle It Out with Nikki M, streaming now on your favorite podcast platform.
I had a number of experiences like this where I so did not want to do the right thing. But God had a plan, and God put people in my life that ended up being, blessings. Similarly, I wrote a letter to my bank explaining to them that I had been a bit dishonest in some of my dealings with them. And I just told them the truth, that I was an addict and I was trying to live a spiritual way, and I made some mistakes in my past. And, I wasn't truthful in the mortgage application. And, it's amazing to be able to get this stuff off my chest and to face reality, because it takes so much energy to maintain a lie. Okay, I've got 6 minutes left. So the world is a lot lighter for me today. I'm going to skip through step 4 and 5. It's very thorough work. It's very thorough work. At the end of it, the world is lighter. A burden has been lifted from sharing my all of my sins with another addict. And with sex and lust addiction, I needed to share that with another sex addict who would understand what it's like. Because when I came into the rooms, I felt like having an addiction to lust wasn't a different, it was a different ball game to alcohol and drugs. And I'm just here to say that there are people that I trust now, that I consider my brothers, that I consider my best friends who are in the program, that I've told everything. And I can look the world in the eye, and that's, I would never have dreamt that I'd feel that way about life again, after what I did and who I did it to. So I just also want to just focus on the violence for a bit, because this was a curveball for me. After I recovered from the sex addiction, I noticed that my addiction to violence and drama started to escalate, and it was very slow, and it manifested in my case in the communities I lived in. I just happened to start getting into a lot of arguments to people and being asked to leave various communities, and it was becoming a problem because I just could not hold my tongue. I could not just, I wanted to speak my truth, and it was getting me into a lot of trouble. So, you know, um, I joined a fellowship called Violence Anonymous. It's a fairly new fellowship, but they do a lot of good work on understanding where violence comes from, and the tools to uh, to process the triggers, and like living on the drama triangle is what causes violence. If I think I'm a victim or a rescuer or a perpetrator, that is ultimately going to result in me engaging in drama, and violence is a failure to communicate. It's a failure to communicate. So we need tools to communicate, um, you know, nonviolent communication, being able to state your feelings and needs. This is stuff that I was able to have a look at after I dealt with my core addiction, which was lust. And in that fellowship, we look at, we do a step 4 in that fellowship. How did I use power and control to meet my needs? How did I use violence to meet my need for love, connection, security? So, and then, how do we neutralize triggers? So, what I've learned is when I'm triggered, I need to just get the hell out of that room. I'm powerless. So when it comes to violence, I just need to leave, and I need a safety plan. I need to know if I'm going into a meeting, which could be triggering, where are the exits? What's my strategy to lead this meeting? Um, what tools can I use prior to the meeting so that I'm going into that meeting prepared? And then we do a lot of work on reframing, looking at talking to the inner child, having an internal dialogue with that child. But I must stress that I do all this with God present, who I choose to call, Jesus, and the Father, and the Holy Spirit. All of these are there, with me as I'm doing this work, and that's really important because the solution is spiritual. It's not psychological. The problem does center in the mind, but the solution is spiritual. And thankfully, I can have a look at things like violence, and join other fellowships. And I'm definitely excited to see what I need to work on next. It's a long road to recovery, and I think I've got just 30 seconds or so left. So yeah, I just want to just focus on what life is like today for me. I've gotten back in touch with family that was estranged from me for 20 years. They invited me to their wedding. Like I'm sponsoring, a few men at the moment from around the world and seeing their lives improve. And I'm involved in my local community. I'm no longer um, a nuisance or a troublemaker in my community. I'm a valued member of my community. I'm active in church. I play music now. I play music for the church. I'm not, a drug taking. Um, I'm not in fantasy anymore with that. I'm actually using the gifts I have, to the benefit of others. So, yeah, I am just really blessed to have made it the other side. And thanks again, Justin, for allowing me to speak. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Shay. Miracles. I love this share about the miracles that have happened, and I've written several questions here for you, and I have a invitation to the live audience here. If you have a question for Shay, please type it in the chat. If you want to remain anonymous, just put anonymous or direct message me that question, and we'll get to those questions as we go along. So thank you for that. I want to jump in just a little bit here to one of the things you shared. You said, hey, when I got working with my sponsor, we did things a little bit out of order. We jumped into step 3, steps 10 and 11 right away. And while I personally also kind of follow that in with many of the people I work with, a lot of people say, hey, the steps are in order for a reason. Tell me why you think that it was helpful for you to dive into those steps a little bit out of order.
Yeah. Okay. So the context is that I had 2 years working the steps. And so I knew the steps, but I just was not getting um, the spiritual aspect of it. Now, it seemed my experience was that the work was being diluted in other fellowships. They weren't working off the big book. That was the single most effective difference, was we were working directly out of the source. The fact that it was not in order um, is interesting. I don't know, because I would say that I needed a morning meditation and nightly review. I needed to start doing thorough self-examination of what the problem was. And I was ready to do that. And it worked for me to do it then. I think, as I said, those 2 years were not wasted. Those 2 years I was working in the steps, and in a way I had a first, second, and third step experience already. So it made sense to look at the third step. With steps 10 and 11, um, people do say, oh, you can't do those steps until you've had like more of a connection with God. But it worked, like I wanted to put into practice my faith. And that's, it just worked for me. With all this stuff, it's like, if it works, I'm not going to question it. Like, I don't care as long as it works, so it worked. Woohoo.
Woohoo! I love that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shay. That's awesome. All right. So I love the experience you shared with your sponsor, where he said, "Hey, have you really and actually had enough, and are you willing to go to any lengths to recover?" When that question, "Have you really and actually had enough?" was asked, what was your thoughts? What was your initial response in your mind? And you said you took a day to think on it and ponder on it. Tell me about how that conversation with yourself and with higher power went.
Yeah. So as a fantasy addict, there were still certain scenarios which I distinctly remember, you know, um, I wouldn't mind still having those. Like, I remember having that thought, but when it came to the core issue for me, which was pornography and masturbation, I definitely had enough. And it was interesting to juxtapose my reaction to that versus the things I hadn't had enough of. But my sponsor said, you know, if you want to work this program, you need to be completely sober from drugs, um, alcohol, any mind-altering substances, right? Including things like codeine or painkillers or anything that you'd use to self-medicate, right? And I was down with that. So I remember like imagining the scenarios that, were still kind of intriguing to me, but there was overwhelming case at that point that I definitely had enough of pornography and masturbation. It brought nothing to my life. I remember that very clearly. And in a sense, that was a very selfish omission. It was a selfish thing. It was like, this is literally not bringing me anything at all. And I think that was the realization. And it took 2 years to get to that point.
Hey, Spearheads, if you're looking to dive deeper into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous with people who live the solution, then you won't want to miss Rico 12 Big Book Roundtable. Join David G., Nikki M., and me, the moderator Justin B., 3 recovered addicts from multiple fellowships, as we break down the big book line by line. In each 30-minute episode, we share our experience, strength, and hope in a real, raw, and practical roundtable discussion. So, if you are ready to learn and apply what you learn, tune in to Rico 12 Big Book Roundtable on your favorite podcast platform.
Yeah.
Well, I love that. And you said, the admission of, this isn't doing me any good. It's not helping me was kind of a selfish thing. Talk to me about the evolution of your understanding of selfishness and the self, I guess, in that decision, because, well, I think that in the end, it turns out that, recovery from porn, masturbation from the self there was a good thing and not a selfish thing. So talk us through a little bit of your understanding of that.
Yeah. Okay. So definitely at the beginning, I did not understand what it meant to be selfish because that's the problem. What happened over the course of the work, especially using the 10-step, right? The last part of 10-step is turn your thoughts to someone you can help. Is there was an opening of my sphere to other people and a consideration of how my actions affect them. That was the door to becoming less selfish. It was when I was doing my inventory and I was looking at how my actions hurt other people. Where was I to blame? Doing all of that with God in the room, doing it prayerfully, God showed me the answer to these questions. And it was, through that gateway of how am I actually affecting them? Like how have I hurt them? So that was like how I started to expand my sense of awareness that I'm not living in my own TV show, right? Which is the feeling that addiction is like for me. It was like I'm a character in my own video game and I should be able to do what I want to do, right? And everyone else is like an NPC character. So it was and so that was the initial. Today it's definitely evolved, and it continues to evolve. Like there's a sense that I am now connected to life again, and I am, if I push you away, I push a part of me away. I see you in me, I see God in you, and that experience is continually unfolding. And just looking at what I had prejudice about at the beginning, I'm less of a prejudiced person today, and yeah, so I think there's something about judgment there as well, so yeah, that's
Mm.
how I feel about it.
Yeah, Shay, I loved that example you gave. I'm the main character of my video game. Everybody else is an NPC. That opened my mind to just how objectification for me works. Everybody else is just an object for me to interact with the way that I want to, and they have no volition. They have no agency of their own in my mind. And that just was really powerful for me. Thank you for helping me see that. We do have a question now from our live audience. This is from Damien. Damien says, does the All Addicts Anonymous Fellowship bring enough to your recovery with lust addiction and with sobriety? And with sobriety, is it still a daily struggle surrendering your lust addiction to God? And mainly, he'd like to hear the differences between All Addicts Anonymous and other S fellowships.
Yeah, okay. So it, I wouldn't describe my life as a daily struggle to stay sober. I definitely don't feel that way. I feel like I've recovered. I feel like I need to maintain my spiritual condition. I think what All Addicts Anonymous is really good at is, talking about the four absolutes, absolute love, unselfishness, honesty, and purity, which are the the sort of inverse of the four things we watch for in step 10. And I think um, it has opened the door for me to enlarging my spiritual life, to see things in more than one sphere, because as the big book also just says, the problem is self-centeredness, right? That's the root of all our troubles. So I think All Addicts Anonymous, it has been really great. Um, it's welcomed a lot of people from different addictive palettes, and that's really brought people together that would not otherwise mix, right? Which is the whole promise of Alcoholics Anonymous, to make a group of people from different social and economic and national spheres, So I think it's fulfilling one of the prophecies that were in the book, that this is a design for living that works in rough going. And I think this is a natural evolution of where we need to get to. I honestly think that this is just the way we are, enlarging our spiritual life by having these kinds of fellowships. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you for going through that, Shay. That's helpful for me. Hopefully, it's helpful for the others out there. A reminder: if you have a question for Shay, post it in the chat. We'll get to those. My next question for you, Shay. Early in your share, you talked about how, as you look back, it appears that you had an alcoholic mind. You experienced the disease of alcoholism from a very early age, and you talked about various things that you kind of obsessed about. You jumped in with both feet. For example, video games, gaming. As you look back at things now, how do you see? Um, how did your classmates, your friends, people that you associated with look at you differently and maybe identify, man, you're really into this and it's not quite normal. Do you see that now looking back?
Um, I was always a bit of a loner. At school, I didn't really socialize much. I was kind of picked on. So I think people, kids are very smart. I think they pick up on when something isn't quite right. And I was, kind of always on the fringe with everything. I wasn't really involved in any of the social stuff, or like, the band, the school orchestra, or any of the clubs. I was kind of like always on the fringe, So, looking back now, I wasn't really participating much in the social aspect. You'd find me in the library. I don't know about you guys, how you were, but I would just live in the library at school, and I was just focused on getting good marks. That was, maybe that's coming from an Asian background. I don't know, but there were some Indians who didn't go to the the library. They would be going across the road to the girls' school, trying to chat up the girls there. So that wasn't me. I just love to be in the library, be on my own. I still do actually, still quite introverted, but yeah, I think there were times when, people were a bit surprised at some of the stuff I'd bring to school. I remember one guy saw some of the pornography, that I had on my laptop when he came over to do a band practice with me, and yeah, that was pretty shameful. So I knew that, I had an unhealthy obsession with it, but um, I did not think about how other people lived. That was like really far from my mind, you know.
Yeah, thank you, Shay. And I'm going to jump in and share a little bit of my take on this, my experience with this. As I was younger, I didn't recognize it myself, but as I look back, I remember several times that when I was around groups of friends who were, at least from what I can tell, normal, didn't experience the disease of alcoholism, they'd say stuff like, "Justin, you're a pervert. You're pretty sick. What are you even looking at, talking about, and thinking about here that makes you want to say those things?" And and at the time, I thought, "Oh, that's funny, whatever. We're just guys hanging out." And but as I look
Yeah.
back, I can just see that big difference. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Shay?
Yeah, I just remember, there'd be some sleepovers where the guys would find, some cutesy, some like kind of soft core like magazine they'd bring in, and it was just, there's a bit of banter there flying around, and then that's it, But for me, I would fixate on it, I'd be like, okay, well, if this is what's in a magazine, what is on the internet, like what is available, how much more taboo can it get, like I was always wanting to push the boundaries, and I think with other people, they would just be like, okay, like, it's just a bit of banter, and okay, we're done with that. But for me, I would spend hours. It was just part of my, uh, prior to lust, I was obsessed with my haircut. I used to have curtains, and I used to spend hours in the mirror just making sure that the curtains were like the right angle, like it had to be, you know, styled the right way. And at the time that there was this gel that came out called Brill Cream, and everyone loved it. Everyone wanted to have a quiff, right? And I would just obsess about, getting it just perfect. This was something that I would do with anything. I was just wanted to, and I saw it as a badge of honor sometimes. I saw it like I'm just trying to reach excellence, like, this, I'm just trying to be the best version of myself. But really, it was just obsession, plain and simple.
Thank you for going through that, Shay. We have another question from our live audience. This is from Yoel. It says, "You mentioned that you contacted your bank and disclosed to them about some dishonesty. Was that directed to you by your sponsor? And what was the bank's reaction? And did that put you in legal trouble?"
Yeah. While I was doing my step work, I was being asked questions about my property by my bank, and um, I noticed that I was either lying to them or having a lie by omission. A lie by omission is when you tell the truth, but you're kind of hiding the truth. You're kind of not saying the truth, right? Like you're using your words to lie, basically, without lying. Um, I then had a conversation with my sponsor about it. I had a nightly review where I would write, things that came up that day, like dishonesty. And then you know, I prayed about it, and my sponsor did not say, you have to do this. No, it was, I noticed that it was affecting my recovery. I noticed that holding on to this lie would potentially result in a relapse from all the stress of holding on to this lie. So I called up the bank and I said, hey, last time I spoke to you, I was not telling you the truth. Like, this is actually the situation. And, they said, well, can you, put this in writing? And, I wrote them a letter and I explained that, I had just started to get help for my addiction, and I'm trying to live a more honest life. And, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make amends. And, so they said, okay, well, this is what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to pay back the money that you actually owe. We'll work it out, and we'll spread it across, your term, and this is how much extra you're going to pay, and that's what happened. And there was no trouble. There was, no legal trouble, so it was pretty straightforward. Actually, it was just the fear of what could go wrong. Will I lose my property? What will happen to my credit rating? Like, well, all of these things that keep us in the lie, when the truth is, my life, if I don't recover, there is not going to be any income. There's not going to be any home, so, that's what happened.
Yeah. And I've got one more question for you here, Shay. You mentioned that, one of the stories in the big book that really resonated with you is Bill's story when he made a life that allowed him to drink morning, noon, and night. And you created a life that allowed you to lust, to act out whatever that may look like, morning, noon, and night. How do you get out of that life? Once you recover, if I've built that life, that's where all of my friends, my connections, everything are. How do you get out of that life and rebuild something that is real and healthier? Hey, Rico 12 Spearheads. If our recovery resources have helped you, please consider a donation. Your financial support, as well as your word of mouth support, keeps Rico 12 running and reaching the man who is still sick. Donate today at rico12.com/support, or check the show notes for PayPal and Venmo links. Every contribution helps carry the message. Thanks for being a Rico 12 Spearhead.
That's a big question. It's a big question. Okay, I'm going to answer it this way. I'd always wanted to take from people in addiction. I always had massive FOMO, right? I always felt that I needed to get ahead in life, that it's a dog eat dog world. That's probably something I received from my parents, that the world's a difficult place, the world's not fair, it's dog eat dog. So you have to take, right? And I think what started to happen is, instead of taking, right, when you take, you put your hand out like this, right? I had started to receive. So my mindset, instead of like, I need this from you, right? It was like, okay, God, okay, do what you will with me. And, I trust that you will give me what I need, And I think what started to happen is, I started to surround myself with people who also wanted to receive. And this gesture is one of receiving, but it's also one of giving, right? If I'm going to give you something, I do this. If I want to take from you, it's this, And I just started surrounding it just happened. It's the law of attraction. If you start giving, you surround yourself eventually with people who want to give. And if you're a taker, you'll surround yourself with people who want to take from you. And I think I just started to learn the difference between the two ways of being. And that just totally changed. Like, it teleported me into a different dimension, and I started to notice people I hadn't noticed before, right? Like, I started to notice people, like homeless people. I'd stop and have a conversation with them, right? Like, just my whole, like, sense of, like, awareness of what is happening around me changed. Like, instead of seeing people as threats, what can they take away from me? It was like, how can I serve them? And It just happened that way. But that's kind of like, that's a short answer.
A short answer to a long process that
Yeah.
continues to evolve and grow, right? I love that. And that's just so helpful to me. I am recognizing that in my own life. Just since you said that, last night I had an experience where um, it was a give thing, and a receive thing that I wouldn't have seen it this way unless you shared that. I would have thought, well, that was really kind of that person to say that or do that or be, but it's because I also went with a giving and a receiving gesture rather than a taking gesture. And that's a miracle. I'm going to call it a miracle. Thank you so much, Shay, for this. Do you have any final words of wisdom before we wrap up?
No. Just if you're still working the program, work it. It works. Like, you will recover if you work the steps, and there is a dimension of pure joy and usefulness beyond this. It's not just, oh, I'm going to be sober and boo hoo hoo, like I'm have a boring life now. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. This will change your life, and you can live a happy and joyous life. Don't believe the lie that you're just going to be this boring person doing nothing, staying at home, having to stay away from everyone. That's not what recovery is.
Love it. And thank you for living out loud like that, Shay. Thank you for bringing this story to us and this experience, strength, and hope to us. Really appreciate it. If anybody out there has additional questions, please consider putting them in the WhatsApp community or sending an email to me, and I can relay that to Shay. You can email me at rico12pod@gmail.com, and I'll get you connected if you want to connect with Shay. Is that actually, I didn't ask you that. Is that okay, Shay, if people want to connect with you? Okay, perfect. All right. And if you haven't yet done so, please consider rating and reviewing the podcast either on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's a powerful way to work step 12 and get these messages into more people's hands who need these messages. Next Friday, we're going to hear from another first-time Rico 12 speaker, Rabbi Asher, a first-time Rico 12 speaker, and I look forward to hearing his message entitled, actually, I didn't write down what it's entitled. I left it blank there, but I'm excited. I can't remember what it is, but it's going to be good. So stay tuned and updated in WhatsApp or on our email list. Get on our email list. If you're not there, send me an email. I'll get you on it. Now let's wrap up with the third step prayer that Shay will say for us.
God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do with me as thou will. Lead me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help. Thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always.
Thank you so much, Shay.
Thank
Everybody
you.
remember, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Keep coming back, and when you do, come all the way in, sit all the way down. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
I've seen stars fall from above. I've fallen in and out of love. I've been high and I've been low. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. I've seen a boy become a man. He got lost without a plan. He's so far away from home. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me. Your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. I'm looking for the words to say. You make the world a better place, and I can call that place my home. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me, your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. So let me see just what you need to set you free, so we can be. I saw stars fall from above. I fell in and out of love. I got high and I fell low, but now I know that I just can't do this on my own. No, I just can't do this on my own. I just can't do this on my own.